Foundation Season 3 is out in full on Apple TV+. Science fiction show based on the works of Isaac Asimov. This new season is yet again 10 episodes, around 50 minutes each. It stars Lee Pace, Jared Harris, Lou Lobel, and Laura Byrne. This is, and I say this in my reviews of every season so far, one of the strangest shows I ever watched, in the sense that it is so oddly uneven. If I was to score it on a 1 to 10 scale, I'd say it's a 5 out of 10 for me. But it's not because it's a 5 all the way through and every scene is mediocre. Rather, about half of the show, the foundation plot, is like a 2 or 3 out of 10, often poorly written, contrived, completely misunderstanding the point of the novels. But the other half, the Empire plot, is an easy 8, sometimes 9 out of 10, thanks to a fascinating premise, great writing, and fabulous performances, especially from Lee Pace and Laura Byrne. What's even stranger is the bad stuff is adapted straight from the books, not very well, of course, with numerous changes, and the good stuff is made up for the show. And so if it was consistently mediocre, I would just quit watching it a long time ago. But the good stuff keeps drawing me in. It has been compelling enough that I'm willing to suffer through the bad. Now, if you ask most people on the internet, they'll tell you that the show has been steadily improving and season 3 is the best so far, and at this point, very good television. I don't agree with that, at least not fully. I do agree that the show has been slowly getting better, particularly the Foundation subplot, which went from straight up terrible to probably mid. But the problem is, I felt this season the Empire stuff was slightly worse than before, as if to balance things out. Some of the writing was questionable, the dialogue has become strangely contemporary, especially with the amount of swearing, which always takes me out of a show that is meant to take place millennia in the future. And some of the logistics feel poorly sort of constructed, like, for instance, the whole mycogen trial hall looks cool on first glance, but when you think about 3 seconds about the practicality of it, where the people are required to stand, and what practical sense does it make? It doesn't any. Similarly, the scene at the clone tanks in the final episode. The visuals are amazing. The general idea of what's happening is fine, but how it's executed and what specifically happens is just plain stupid. On the Foundation side, I think bringing it generally closer to Empire has been a great choice. I especially loved the scenes between Gale and Brother Dawn, and I was kind of sad that it didn't really blossom into something more towards the rest of the season. I think the production design still looks great, and the story is in fact a little better. But there are still problems. Having Gale Dornick continue to be the protagonist is, I think, a terrible choice. She's just not an interesting character, and the actress is not compelling. And having her survive all these hundreds of years goes directly against the idea of the books. The books were about how on a large enough time frame, the forces of history are so big that no individual really matters in the long run. And here the show is about, Gale Dornick is a superhero now. She has mental powers, she lives for hundreds of years, she knows everything, she's super smart, she can fight, she can do anything. And they also insist on keeping the strange voiceover in her scenes explaining what's going on, which I find to be generally very grating. I didn't particularly like how they executed the mule. I think he's cartoonish and too exaggerated, and as a result not nearly scary enough. And also the nature of, I'm going to be careful not to spoil too much, but the nature of the identity twist is completely different from the books, and I think it makes far less sense. The character of Han Pritchard feels largely underused, and then you have the character of Eebling Miss, who is completely useless because Gale ends up doing everything he should according to the book. As a result, you can cut him out of the season and basically nothing changes. There's no reason for him to be here. I disliked the way that the Foundation subplot ends in the final episode, especially contrasted to the Empire stuff, which ends on a really fucking amazing high note. But the Foundation stuff ends with essentially Gale just literally jumping out of a window of a space station in the middle of a big confrontation, leaving things very unresolved and very confusing about. Okay, I finished the episode and I was like, so which characters died, which survived, what happened in the end? I'm not quite sure. In general, I think that the show suffers most when it tries to be this action-packed superhero thing instead of a philosophical discussion on the trajectory of political entities within the galaxy. Um, Lee Pace is still fantastic. He gets to play with a lot of new angles for his character. Love that. The other Empire actors are great as well. Laura Byrne becomes a scene stealer as Demerzel, and her subplot is possibly the most interesting one in the entire show at this point. I also liked how the show visually takes inspiration from Mass Effect video games, particularly in the giant laser space station, which looks exactly like the Illusive Man's lair, and the Galactic Council is essentially copied from Mass Effect's Citadel. You also have clear inspirations from things like Blade Runner and Tron in the Mycogen subplot. I like that as well as a really sort of new change of pace for the Empire subplot. So yeah, all of those things considered, there are still things that I find deeply enjoyable, but there are also still things that I find deeply frustrating. I refuse to say that the show is properly solid and unequivocally worth watching. I think it still has very distinct parts that are good and parts that are bad. For me, the good is so good that it's worth watching the worst stuff as well, and hopefully as the two storylines continue coming closer and closer together, the flaws will maybe be eliminated. We'll have to see what happens in season 4, which is now confirmed.